All right, let's just jump right in. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're taking an anatomical tour of, well, you. And our main goal here is to debunk some outdated genetic theories using modern research. If you cast your mind back to high school biology, you were probably taught that a lot of your physical traits are simple, binary choices, kind of passed down like a basic on-off switch from your parents. But as modern science reveals, your body is actually a much more intricate, dynamic biological masterpiece. We're going to celebrate all of our unique physical differences by looking really closely at the actual science behind them.
So, to kick things off, I want you to try something. Seriously, give it a try right now. Can you curl the sides of your tongue upward into a little tube-like shape? Some of you are probably doing it effortlessly right now, while others are sitting there struggling no matter how hard you try to force it.
Now, for literally decades, biology textbooks presented this tongue rolling thing as the classic, simple inherited trait, supposedly controlled by just one single dominant gene. But it turns out the reality is way more complex. Modern genetics has actually shown that this ability is influenced by multiple genes, developmental factors, and, get this, even practice. It completely debunks that old single gene myth, proving that human traits rarely actually follow those simple inheritance patterns we used to believe in. Act 1. Myths of the extremities. Rethinking earlobes and thumbs. Go ahead and reach up and feel your earlobes for a second. Do you have attached earlobes, which basically connect directly to the side of your head? Or do you have free earlobes hanging below that point of connection to create a little section that moves independently? Just like the tongue rolling thing, this used to be the absolute go-to example of simple, dominant, and recessive inheritance. But modern research tells a totally different story. The size and attachment of your earlobe actually develop while you're growing in the womb, and it turns out several genes likely contribute to the final shape, not just one switch. It's a purely cosmetic variation, completely harmless, and just a really perfect example of how multiple genetic instructions work together to make your face unique.
Okay, next, hold your hand up and check out your thumbs. Give us a thumbs up. A hitchhiker's thumb bends backward noticeably at that end joint, while a straight thumb remains firmly aligned. And yeah, you guessed it, we used to think this was a single gene trait too. However, researchers now recognize that thumb flexibility actually comes from differences in joint structure, ligaments, and a whole combination of multiple genetic and developmental factors. The degree of flexibility can even change with age and overall joint health. So whether your thumb is straight or curved, both follow the exact same basic human blueprint and are perfectly functional for human grip. Moving on to Act 2, faces, hair, and unique features. The complexity of the head.
When it comes to eye color, it is actually dictated by dozens of genes, not a single switch. We've all seen those outdated classroom charts, right? The ones predicting a child's eye color based on a super simple dominant brown or recessive blue model. Well, in reality, modern research shows that eye color varies because of tiny structural differences and the distribution of melanin within the iris. Dozens of genes contribute to exactly how this pigment is distributed, which scatters light differently and creates all those beautiful, subtle shades of brown, blue, green, hazel, and gray.
Which brings us to heterochromia. This is a totally harmless condition where a person has two completely different eye colors, or even multiple colors within the exact same iris. It is an incredible visual demonstration of melanin distribution at work. Just a subtle, natural variation in colored cells can create one of the most striking natural differences in the human body. And the best part? It rarely affects vision at all. It's literally just a spectacular example of biological diversity.
Now, let's talk about hairlines. A widow's peak, that V-shaped point extending downward on the forehead, is completely different from a straight hairline, which grows in a relatively even horizontal line. Fun fact, the term widow's peak actually comes from historical fashion traditions, not medical science. But biologically speaking, the shape develops before you are even born, driven by really complex developmental processes that determine exactly where your hair follicles appear. Multiple genetic factors influence this, completely debunking any notion it's a simple genetic binary. It just quietly contributes to your facial recognition, helping distinguish you from the crowd.
And speaking of hair, what about hair whorls and cowlicks? Those stubborn patches that cause our absolute worst bad hair days? Well, they're all about unique prenatal follicle angles. A hair whorl is that spiral pattern on the crown of your head, and a cowlick is just a stubborn section of hair growing in a totally different direction. These aren't flaws, they're simply natural variations in how your hair follicles angled themselves early on in the womb. Professional hairstylists actually study these natural growth patterns to cut hair properly, which kind of proves that your unique genetic instructions literally shape your style. Let's look at another highly recognizable feature, dimples.
There is a really interesting biological difference between cheek dimples and chin dimples. Cheek dimples are caused by slight differences in the arrangement of facial muscles and connective tissue that end up pulling the skin inward when you smile. Chin dimples, on the other hand, result from subtle differences in the underlying bone or soft tissue of the lower jaw, fusing together during fetal development. And while genetics definitely influence them, modern research shows their inheritance isn't completely predictable. Children might inherit them from one parent, both parents, or honestly neither. They are totally harmless anatomical variations that just have a huge impact on facial identity.
All right, Act 3, fascinating fingers and toes, celebrating normal variation.
Let's take a look at these 3 really common hand variations. First up, double-jointed fingers. Despite the name, you absolutely do not have extra joints in there. Modern anatomy shows that this increased movement just comes from looser ligaments and slightly different connective tissues. Next is a curved pinky, also known as clitodactyly. This subtle curve toward the ring finger actually happens before birth, just because one of the little finger bones grows with a slightly different shape. Finally, mid-digital hair, those tiny hairs on the middle segments of your fingers. Their presence is dictated by a complex mix of genetics and androgens, which are hormones. All 3 of these just highlight how connective tissues, bone angles, and hormones differ naturally from person to person.
And if we look down at our feet, we see similar fascinating variations. First is a long second toe, commonly called Morton's toe or the Greek foot, mainly because ancient Greek statues really favored this aesthetic proportion. It's simply a naturally longer bone structure that's determined before birth. Then we have connected toes, or mild syndactyly, where a small little web of skin persists between the toes just because they didn't completely separate during fetal development. Both of these are generally completely harmless, totally functional, and represent how tiny changes during early growth produce lasting, beautiful anatomical differences.
Act 4, the blueprint of human identity, microscopic differences.
Let's look at the timeline of how fingerprints form. Now, you might think fingerprints are purely genetic, but they really aren't. While genetic instructions do interact with skin development, it's actually the fact that the fetus grows and moves inside the womb that finalizes the design. We're talking minute environmental pressures, tiny shifts in movements that actually alter the developing skin. This amazing combination of genes and unique microscopic environmental pressures in the womb creates those permanent friction ridges. You know, the loops, whorls, and arches that make up an identity so unrepeatable that not even identical twins share the same fingerprints.
And what about handedness? Well, about 90% of people are right-handed, leaving 10% as left-handed or mixed. What's absolutely incredible about modern research here is that scientists have used ultrasounds to observe unborn babies favoring one hand. So this preference isn't just a quirky habit you pick up later. It begins long before birth. It reflects a deeply complex interaction of genetics and the remarkable specialization of the human brain, where each hemisphere contributes differently to movement and coordination.
So the crucial point of this entire explainer can really be summed up like this. Many characteristics once believed to follow simple inheritance patterns actually arise from the interaction of numerous biological factors working together. From your earlobes to your tongue, from the whorl of your hair down to your fingerprints, modern science has thoroughly debunked the idea of a simple dominant recessive textbook diagram for these traits. Your body is an intricate, dynamic biological masterpiece shaped by a wild mix of genes, hormones, environment, and development. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. What other unique microscopic differences are hiding in plain sight on your own body? Seriously, take a closer look at yourself in the mirror today. Notice your hairline, check your thumbs, look really closely at your irises. The things you might consider totally standard or ordinary are actually the result of an incredibly complex biological journey. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring the fascinating science of you.